Hi, my name's Deb Wing and this is Millie, who looks quite large on the video just there. Millie's the studio cat and we have a visiting dog at the moment, so she's sort of quite keen to stay very close to me to protect herself. Right, I'm going to show you how to make a Linocut print in the way that I normally work. So the materials that I've got to start with is I have a piece of Hessian backed grey lino, sort of the traditional lino that we use. I've got some black Pitt pens, okay, they're made by Faber-Castell, and I've got various thicknesses. I've also got a calligraphy tip and also a brush tip. They're all quite nice to use, and I find them quite good for actually transferring an image onto the lino. I've also got a pencil though, just to start off with, and it's a 3B pencil. I don't like to use anything that's too hard, because basically the temptation then is to actually sort of almost create ridges in your lino just from pressing hard with your pencil. You want something quite soft. I haven't even bothered sharpening it before I worked on this image. I've got an eraser as well, and another good reason for using the Pitt pens is if you do make an error when you're actually creating the image, you can actually use a rubber to erase the Pitt pens, sort of if you're fairly quick about it. And then the other thing that I've got is I've got a couple of details from a photograph that I took last week, and it's a photograph from a beach on the Isle of Bute, and it's got the mountains of Arran in the background as well. There's a bit more detail just there because you can see that the sparkles in the water are extending onto the beach itself as well, and that's going to be a key part of this image, you know, just all of those sparkles of water. So I'm looking at how I want to sort of manage that and create a print from it. Now I've already drawn in pencil, and then I've done some Pitt pen marks over the top as well, just there. So you can see my mountains in the background, and those will be slightly different colours as they recede away into the distance. You can also see where I'm going to have those sparkles on the beach. And when you have a look at the sparkles in the water, although some of them appear very random, you can kind of see them coming in lines sort of across there, sort of horizontally. So I have put some lines onto the lino as well, just to act as a guide for me. You can see where you've got the lines, the ridges on the sand where the tide is just going out. And I've created that on my print as well, not to the same extent, you know, I've not gone for the same pattern, and I've actually left a sort of fairly blank bit at the bottom just there as well. Now, I've actually done this drawing fairly quickly today, so it's not very detailed, and it can't be for a print that's only sort of, I think it's about 16 by 25 centimetres. So what I want to do next is I want to just cut out the white for the sparkles on the water. Now, I'm not going to actually start inking today, even if I get all of the cutting done. And the reason for that is that I want to have the Pitt pens have a chance to soak into the lino. They need to cure to be able to stay on the lino all of the way through the printing process. Sometimes with some methods of transfer, if you try working too quickly, then you can actually lose those lines when you clean up because they sort of just start to erase. But if you give it a chance to soak into the lino, I'm going to leave it at least 24 hours. And what I'll probably do is get some hot water and just sort of try and rub off the pen first. If it's still staying there, you know, sort of if I've got enough of an image to work from, then I'm fine. If it starts to rub off too much, I need it to cure for a little bit longer before I start. Because I don't think there's anything more frustrating. Certainly when you're doing a very large print with lots of detail, you don't want to start losing all of those lines that you've spent a lot of time doing. On my big prints, it might take me, you know, sort of 2 or 3 days to actually draw the image, and I certainly don't want to be losing that. So the next step is going to be creating the sparkles in the water. Millie doesn't look very interested, does she? Okay, Millie is now asleep on a chair, which is where she's got to be because she can't be in the way when I'm actually doing the cutting. So what I've got so far is in my lino, you can just see where I've cut away this area on the sand where you've got the water showing through, sort of in sparkles. And then I've cut another ridge along there, just where the sea meets the hills in the background. And you can see that bit down there, it's basically to represent that sort of sparkle in the ridges of the sand. So, so far I have used my 11, that's the smallest U-shaped cutter, and I've carved away in that direction. I have found, I did make one error, so I've had to, where it slipped a little bit, and the reason that it slipped is my fault because I haven't honed my tools before I started this print. So I need to get that sorted out before I start carving again. Now once I've got those solid areas cut away, my next step is going to be to create sparkles in the water. Now I could use a V-shape or a U-shape cutter for that if I wanted to, but what I tend to use is one of these, which is a Phillips head screwdriver. And I've got that one that is a fairly large head. I've then got a really tiny one just there. And then I've got different Phillips heads of different sizes that I can put into this screwdriver. Now, if you look at the top of this screwdriver, it's absolutely ruined, really. But the way that I use it is I actually get a weight. This is off some old-fashioned kitchen scales, and I put where I want to have a sparkle of water, and I just literally bash away at it like that, and it gives me some really, really organic looks. If you feel it's starting to look a bit too regular, one of the things you can do is twist it as you hit it so that it actually moves around a bit. But that will look absolutely fine. Now I'm not going to subject you to do this all of the time, but you get the idea of what I'm doing. Now what I need to do is I need to do this so that it merges in with the bits that I've already cut, because I don't want those to be really regular lines. So I'm going to be doing a lot of bashing. Really, really don't try it if you've got a migraine, and also make sure that everything is secure on your table. So if I was doing it right at that end of the table, everything would be jumping around because I'm putting so much pressure on it. Depends what sort of table you've got. But that's the way that I'm going to start off, by just getting all of my sort of lino cut away where I want those white sparkles. Okay, so I've just finished doing all my little holes in there. So if I just hold that back to the camera, you can see where I've done sort of lines of those sort of bashing the Phillips head screwdriver into the lino. One of the really important things after you've done this is, particularly when you're not carving but you're just bashing stuff in like that, if you run your hand over the lino, you'll feel how rough it is. And it's really difficult to get every last bit of lino out, and you don't want those little bits coming out in your print when you ink. So I'm just getting a fairly firm nail brush that's here. A bit light on there, isn't it? But I don't want to shut the sunshine out. So I'm just trying to get every single little bit of lino that has been cut away, or pushed away. And already I can start to feel that's much, much smoother. Sometimes doing it in different directions as well can also help. What you don't want to use is use a wire brush or anything that could actually mark the lino, because you don't want to do that. But this is firm, but so it's got quite rounded ends. It's quite a natural brush. And I think that feels as if it's going to be absolutely fine. So that's how much, let me just stand up a bit, that's how much I've actually cut into the lino currently. Doesn't look a huge amount. Okay, obviously as you get towards the bottom, just there, you've got a little bit more. And you can see the way I've tried to go straight up to those edges. Interesting there, I can kind of see some straight edges that I might still want to get rid of. We'll see about that. What I will do is I'm definitely going to use a proof for this. So I'm going to do, when I do my first layer, I'll start off by just seeing what it looks like. And if I don't feel I've cut enough white away at that point, I will cut some more. The other thing that you can also do is I will probably start off by doing sort of like a blue wash. I want to do sort of blue to white just over the hills, and then it will probably come white to blue later down. So if I want to, I could cut out some more sparkles in the sea and on the beach after that first layer, and to use just two different colours, to have the white and the blue, wouldn't be a bad thing. That will give more of a sparkling effect. That can also work really, really well when you're doing snow on print. So sometimes I'll use that same technique using the Phillips head screwdriver when I'm trying to carve snow. And if you do some in the white of the paper and then do like a pale blue over the top, or even a cream, if you then do some more, it almost looks like layers of snowflakes going across the print instead of just having a single colour there. So that can actually work quite well. Okay, so I'm now ready to sort out the setup for my printmaking. So the first thing that I do is I've got a piece of board, which is just a piece of MDF that I've got cut to the size that I want. It's plenty big enough. What I've got down here is I've got a runner of lino down each side. That's purely to protect the press, because I'll be printing this print on a press. I will do one by hand just so that I can see what it's like for those of you trying it out who haven't got a press at home. Where I'm not using the press, I'll be using a wooden spoon and a paperweight, so which you can pick up really cheaply from second-hand shops. Okay, so on this piece of MDF, other than the lino, I've also got some wide, just plain brown paper tape, and that just keeps the surface of the MDF usable for longer, so it means I can reuse it more easily. I've also got paper tape holding on 2 Turner Burton pins at this end. Right, on my lino itself, on the reverse side, I've put some double-sided tape. It's very thin tape. Be careful if you buy carpet tape that you don't buy one that's spongy, because you need it to be as thin as possible. If it's spongy, you won't get the results that you want out of your print. So on here, I've just put my lino and I've made marks already. But what I tend to do is to just measure up from the side of the board. And on this occasion, I wanted to divide it in two, so it's 14.5 centimetres on either side, because I wanted it to be really central. That's partly so that it's got the pins in the centre as well. Now, a lot of people automatically put the top of the print nearest to the Turner Burton pins, and I guess that does mean that they don't get in the way at all while you're actually cutting and doing the inking. However, I try to think about how I'm going to actually print, and it's sunny again, but if I come close again, the sky is going to be cut away sort of fairly early on compared with some of this detail down here on the beach. So for that reason, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the beach down nearest to the pin. So I always put the part of the print that I'm going to be working on last down towards the bottom nearest to the pins. And that's because if you're just working on that final bit, you need the bit that you're working on and that you're inking to be as stable as possible when you cut away a lot of the rest. So it makes sense to me that you actually have the bit where you want the most stability as near to the pins as possible. I don't find that the pins get in the way at all. Okay, this double-sided tape is horrible stuff. It's really difficult to get off and it's very sticky, but at least when it goes onto the board it's not going anywhere. Now, I tend to just, if I show you where I've got the end of the tape just here, I don't bother about the whole thing, but I use my nail or I'd use something sharp. If you haven't got nails, then pairs of tweezers are really useful at this stage. And just go down in the corner that you're wanting to lift it by, because it can take an age to just peel off the backing paper. So just do that just there and see if my nails will work. Okay, so because I've actually really sort of pressed it down hard in that area, I'll just go to that end on each one. I'll be lucky if I get all 4 of these up without any hassle, but that's 2. As I said, a pair of tweezers, obviously, you sort of have tweezers for printmaking anyway, but sort of to be able to just sort of lift off the tape as well is really good. Might have an interruption. Got a husband coming through the door at the back of me who probably doesn't realise that I'm videoing.
I do, because I've just heard you.
Okay, thank you. So just got to see if this one will lift off as well. Not 3 out of 4 come away okay. And this one's just been a wee bit resistant, but there you go. So as soon as I've got those 4 bits of tape off, I can then fasten this down. And as I said, I want the bottom towards the pins. So I'm going to start off by just placing it where I think that's going to be right. I just marked in the corner from when I put it on previously, and I'm ready to press down. Quite often what I'll do as well is I'll now just run it through the press just to make sure that it is absolutely flat and glued on. So the other thing that I also do, and I should have done it before I stuck it down, that's because I'm actually working for the video as well, and so I'm actually going to make a mask out of a piece of paper, and this is just out of the middle of the previous mask. And basically I need to draw a shape on there that is the same size as the lino, just so that I can pop it over the lino ready for inking, and it creates an inking mask so that if I go over the sides it doesn't matter. So I'll explain that a little bit more later. So I've now got my lino glued to the board, and I've also got my inking mask that can be removed quite easily. I also keep the middle that I've cut out of the inking mask as well. I've just cut that out with a sharp knife, like a Stanley knife. Okay, so once you've taken that away, just hang on to it, because there might be a reason why you would want that in a bit. The other thing to say is, I know I was using a scrubbing brush to scrub away at the lino earlier. It's equally useful after you've used that hideous double-sided tape. It really messes up your scissors, so you do need to give those a good scrub with a brush as well, otherwise you just won't be able to use them properly. So I'm now ready to cut my paper to size, so that'll be ready, and then I'll be doing my first layer. Right, so I'm about to start mixing ink for layer 1. I don't know if you'll be able to see if I move this a little bit closer to the camera, but I often just make some notes in the side of the ink mask, just to sort of decide where I'm going to put the different colours. So for this one, I want some blue in the sky, but some white just above the hills and mountains just there. Then I'm going to go to light blue at the top of the water there, and then move out and graduate that to a light brown as I get towards the beach. So that's the intention. I was just writing to someone on social media who was just saying that what they're doing really isn't going the way that they saw things in their head, and I think that is always the case. And I think to a certain extent what you do is you start off with an idea of what you might do for each layer, but actually the print evolves and it kind of takes on a life of its own, so you sort of have to just go with it sometimes. Right, the only inks that I have are Calico Safe Wash and Extender. I just use the 3 primary colours, so Process Blue, Process Yellow and Process Red, and I'm going to mix quite a lot of Extender for this one to start with, and I'm going to want some blue. I'm going to probably move some of this onto another mat. I actually mix inks and roll inks on IKEA vegetable chopping mats. They're very, very cheap, very versatile, very easy to clean up as well. I'm also going to use some Cranfield wax dryer, so I'm just going to put about a pea-shaped amount of ink just there. I'm going to get a palette knife, and I'm just going to mix that in with the Extender. Then whatever colours I add later on, that dryer is going to be in with the Extender that is going to be in with all of the different colours I'm going to use. So I'm just going to move some of this Extender onto the mat next door, where I'm going to, I think, go on to the light brown just there, and just come back onto the main mat just here. Right, so I want some white here, going to want some blue, and I might actually have a tiny bit of black as well. And the reason for that is that I want to dull down the blue just a little bit at this stage. I don't want it too bright. I'm getting towards the end of this blue. They last me a long, long time. I sort of tend to buy about one each of the process colours every year. And then loads and loads of extender and opaque white as well. So let's put a little bit of black down too. Not sure what I've done with the black. Right, I'll need the red and I'll need the yellow as well. Okay, so I'm going to put a bit of black just here. Going to need a wee bit more than that maybe. You can save any ink that you don't use. I usually just put it onto acrylic coasters and then just cover them with snap wrap with cling film, and that will save sort of for a later layer. Right, I'm going to, I don't know if you can just see that now, I'm just putting out a tiny bit of red. And also a tiny bit of yellow. Now the reason I'm doing that is that using Caligo Safe Wash, if I want to make a brown, I mix in red and yellow to make orange, and then I mix some black with it. So I'm just going to mix these to start with. I won't need all of that red necessarily. And I will need some white with it as well, because I want it to be a light brown, a bit more of the red. Yeah, I'm just checking that you can see what I'm doing just here. And I'm just going to pick up just a little bit of that black, just put it on the corner. Probably won't need all of that. It's already starting to go. And a bit more. Need very tiny amounts of black in with the ink to get the kind of colours that you want. Right, that is starting to move to quite a nice brown colour. So I'm going to mix it in with the extender, and you can see there as soon as it hits the extender, that is making it much, much more transparent and also lighter at the same time. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move a little bit of the white from there onto there. I'm being careful not to contaminate the white with the brown, because I do want to use that with the blue as well. Right, so let's have a think about how I want to play this. I'm going to have might need a bit more white there actually. I'll have a quick look, yeah. And it's quite dull, you know, sort of the colour on the picture. And what I do want to do is to make sure that those sparkles stand out as much as possible. I'm definitely going to have more white, and I'm going to put a little bit more white out, because otherwise it's all going to get used up on this. So a bit more white. And bring that over. That's probably getting closer to the kind of colour that I'm going to want. It's okay if it goes a wee bit darker towards the back, because I'm going to be covering that up a little bit as well. I'm just going to go in for a bit more black. Again, just put it on the corner, because I only want to introduce a wee bit at a time. Right, and that is dulling that down quite considerably. I'll put a little bit more in, and it's tiny, tiny amounts at a time. And a little bit more black at that end. This is just dulling that colour, which is more the way that I want it to be. I want to keep it reasonably light because it's only the first layer, and I'm fairly happy with that, I think, to start off with. So we'll put that on one side and come back to my blue. Okay, so on this one I'm going to start off by putting my white at this end, and then I want to introduce some blue at this end, and that processed blue is just so strong. It's a beautiful colour, but it's not the sort of thing that you find, certainly not in Scotland. It's, if you were doing Mediterranean, you know, sort of landscapes, I guess it might be quite useful just like that. And right, mixing in some black with it. And again, that's dulling that down. But there's still, yeah, sort of a lot of strength there. So I'm now going to start moving the white along. And I'll move this rest of the white in just there. So I'm fairly happy with that, and you can see that I haven't mixed it entirely. That's okay, because what I will do is I'll actually be mixing that with the roller itself as well once I get to start printing. So I'll show you the inking up at some point, but that is the mixing finished for layer 1. Okay, so we'll see how this goes. I've started to just mix with the roller. I'm coming in for this end purely because when I ink, I don't want you to have to just try and see something that's going behind me. So I've got that in the right order. I'm then going to take another vegetable chopping mat, and that's where you blend it much, much more. The rollers that I use are the hard Japanese rollers, and I think you might be able to get them now from Jackson's. You can certainly get them from Intaglio. And what I'm going to do on here is I'm just going to roll so that I've got some white going above. And I'm going to just sort of gradually layer all across there. Remembering, of course, that the first one that you do, it takes a little while for the lino to absorb the ink fully and to get the best possible effects. So I've got a little something just there. Always in that first layer as well, in that first inking, you know, it's just checking for any little bits of lino that are somewhere where they shouldn't be. Right, I'm just going to come down there a wee bit. Right, then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just sort of do a little bit, I'm coming over on the darker side of the blue. Right, okay, you can't see where I'm working that, so that's just there. And I'm going to bring this down to this side. You can see that I haven't mixed it up properly, so let's do it with the roller now to make sure that that becomes a nice blend on the print itself. And I'm going to do that right up in the top, just there. Move that down a little bit. Sometimes you can see little lines developing, and that's often just because where you're picking up a bit on the end or something like that, and you want to try and avoid that. I want something that's a nice smooth graduation. Right, I really like that bit in the sky. And I'm going to come back to my other roller. I still want to blend that in a little bit. And again, I want to just come down with this one. So sometimes you might do a blend and just put it on with one roller, Other times you can actually use different rollers to insert the colours and then blend a lot more on the lino. So that's quite subtle, might be too subtle, but we'll wait and see. I've still got some lines there that I'm not entirely happy with. Right, okay, that's looking okay. Then with this smaller roller, I'm going to come down to the bottom. Let me just swap over. And I'm going to come down there. I might be able to do this on the same mat, I think. It looks as if it might be a little bit too dark still, so I might need some more white on that, but so what I'm going to do just here is I'm going to start off this end a little bit because I don't want it to go too far up on its own. So I'm mixing it in with the blue because at some point there will be a little bit of layering where you've got the suggestion of the sand going underneath the water. Turning it a wee bit green at the moment, but again, I don't think that's an issue. And the other thing that I can do is come back to my blue roller. Quite like that actually, that looks okay to me. So if I just lift this up, so that's the way that the lino's looking at the moment. We'll see how it goes on. We'll do a reveal in a minute. Okay, so I've just put the first one through the press, and what I do is I have a thinner piece, or it's just backing board actually, a thinner piece of board that I put on top that covers the runners as well. And that then means that there's no, the pressure's really, really evenly spread. I actually have blankets above this as well, but I put the whole lot, the board, the second piece of board, all through the press at the same time. I'm working on Hosho paper at the moment, so this is the reveal, and we'll see how it comes. I think that's looking fine for layer 1. So I've just got to do that another 19 times, and I'll be back to you later on with layer 2. Okay, so the next step of my very amateur videoing is to actually take you through layer 3. Now what I've done this time is I've actually inked up the lino, so you will be able to see it sort of just like that. Can you see what I've done with the inking mask just here? Instead of having a straight outline around the corners when I ink, I've now got this cut away for the top of the hills. Now if I show you what the print is looking like currently, it's looking like that, so there's no evidence of the hills there at all. So I've cut away the sky, and I've also made a lot of cuts down here, so I've cut most of the lino away in the sea as it approaches the hills, and then I've just cut away less and less as I've gone down, and then down here in the sand they're quite straight lines for those ripples in the sand as you go down. So I've done all of my cutting that I want to do. The way that I adapted the ink mask was, if you can remember near the beginning, I said when you make your ink mask, just hang on to your piece of paper that you got out of the middle of your mask. And what you can see just here is that, sorry, I'm just sort of parking stuff on the studio floor. So that is the piece of lino that I cut away when I cut out the sky. And I used that to just draw around as a template on that piece of paper, okay? And you can actually see where I've drawn around it with the red line. What I've then done is I've cut just inside that red line because I want to give it plenty of space to be able to fit in. And with the piece of paper that I've cut away, I've just taped it over the top just there. So it means I've got a really, really close inking mask for this final layer, because it could indeed be the final layer. So I've then got my palette for this one. Okay, this is my colour palette for my final layer. And what I've got here is I've got purple at this end. There's a lot of extender in all of it, and you can tell there's lots of extender again because you've got these ridges when you actually roll out the extender and the ink added to it. So at this end I've got some blue with some red mixed in, so I've got some purple mixed into the extender, so that keeps it fairly transparent and fairly soft. I've then got some blue mixed in where the water's going to be, because that purple is really for the mountains, for the hills in the background. I've got some blue for the sea, and then I've got almost like a khaki colour just there. Now the khaki colour, that's a variation of brown really. So what I've done is I've mixed together some red and some yellow to get some nice orange. Then I've mixed some black in with it to get brown. I've mixed that in with the extender, and then I've added white to lighten it up to get the kind of colour that I wanted, because I don't want anything too dark on this print. It's quite a light, bright print. I've also added some white to the blue in the middle, and actually there's the tiniest bit of black in there as well, because just to dull down that blue, otherwise it can be just sort of really, really in your face. And again, a little bit of white in with the purple as well. So they're the colours that I'm playing with. And you can see how they mix out just here. Again, if you look at those, there's quite a lot of grain still on these, and they're not mixed thinly enough for me to be confident about using those on the actual lino. So what I do is I get another one of my mats. So that's where it's actually mixed, ready for me to go onto the actual lino. So I'm going to start off by just topping up, I think, my khaki and my blue. You see, I'm not drawing down from this really, really thick ink at the top. I'm just sticking with this sort of medium thick ink. And then I'm coming on to my finely rolled mat. And then I'm coming here to my lino and making sure I get that bottom edge as well all over. I'm just moving it across a wee bit as I go up and down. I want to make sure I get everything on that bottom line to make sure it's a nice clean line at the base of the print. Okay, so that's for the rest. Then I've got this little roller, which is actually a Korean roller, I think from Hand Printed UK, because I couldn't get the hard Japanese rollers in this size, but I wanted something that I could just roll just the mountain bit for. And it's always really hard if you try and roll an area that is quite thin with a very big roller. You're much, much more likely to pick up chatter, and I really like quite a clean look on my printing. So I'm just going down there. It's a wee bit softer than the Japanese rollers, but it's okay. If I want to, I'll just put a wee bit more on there and just go down it again. Okay, so that's inked up in those colours, and I'm just going to take the mask off. And so that is my print as it looks like at the moment. One thing that I'm going to do is I need to just get a finger either side and just run down the sides just to make sure that there's not too much ink on there, because it will give you some quite nasty edges if you end up with too much ink just sort of falling over the edge of the lino. Okay, so I let that fall down fairly naturally, and I'll put my board over the top. Then I go out of sight. I told you it was an amateurish video, so I'm going to at least have that coming towards you this time, so you can just see the blanket moving across the screen. Okay, so just put the blanket over there, take the board off, and bring the print back
here. I'll do it the other way around. You get the sky first. And that is the print as it looks like after layer 3. Okay, so quite straightforward. Okay, I've just finished the next layer then, so that's layer 3, and you can remember from the reveal, it's looking like that. I'm now going to try and show you a trick that you can use just to get a little bit more colour or different shades in a very, very simple print. So what I've done is, if I just sort of start off by showing you the lino, what I've done is, without doing anything else to it, any more ink, I've just inked up, and now I've cut away some areas here, and they tend to be where the waves are coming in, okay, just there. And I've also cut away just the lower side of each of these ripples on the sand, and I've cut away, you can probably see up here, there's a little area there where there was a hill and it's now sort of got an indent into it, so I've cut away a small hill just in the foreground, and I'll show you what happens with that. Basically, I'm just going to get a piece of newsprint because I'm going to blot. So I'm putting that over the top of my lino. Then you have to do this while the print is still wet. You can't do it when it's dry. You'll have lost the opportunity. So make sure you've got enough time if you're going to try this one. So I've put the blotting paper down on top of the lino. Then I've put the layer 3 ink over the top of that. I then need to have my board, and I'll be doing that thing when I'm going off again. So just putting that on the press. It is a wee bit harder doing this if you're going to do a hand press print. Now, one of the things that I have done is one of this edition is hand press, so I'll be able to try it out with it. So I'm just going to wind through the print with the newsprint sandwich between. So we just bring this over so that you can see. If I take the board off just here. Now this time, when I take the tabs off, it's still got the blotting paper on it. But if I take the blotting paper off, now if you can have a look there, you can see that I've actually got 3 tones in the sand instead of just the 2 that I had previously. And you can also see some slightly darker marks along here in the waves, and you can also see a darker area of rock just there. And that has happened purely because I've cut those areas out before I've blotted. So that ink just there will take a little bit longer to dry because there's more ink on those parts. If I show you those 2 side by side, you can see the difference in a more marked way. Okay, so it does look a bit more sophisticated, and it gives you a little bit more money for your print if you just try that blotting trick by cutting away the areas. Remember, they have to be the areas you want to be darkest that you cut away, and then you can do your final blot. And that is pretty much my final print now.